Welcome everybody to Kart Chaser Grid Talk, powered by Acceleration Kart Racing. We are back again for another wrap-up video, this time episode number 2, the very first post-race episode. I'm Emory Lyda. I was behind the scenes all weekend. I'm joined by two people that were on the front lines. Alexander Searle, back again for another episode, wearing his finest New York Yankees hat, and David Lands, also representing the Yankees this weekend. I'm representing the Kansas City Chiefs. Shout out to Brandon Simeone on our staff, as well as Alex, for their loss that they took this past weekend. But Alex, Dave, how you guys doing today?
I took my loss a week early. The poor Colts were the first victims of the Texans. So yeah, I was the first L. But it seems like I think all of Kart Chaser lost. I don't think a single one of our teams are left, unless I'm forgetting someone. So that's how that goes.
Yeah, well, no, apparently Caleb is a Houston Texans fan, so he's still in it.
He jumped on that freaking bandwagon fast.
He's been very quiet for the past couple of years until CJ Stroud showed up. But yeah, nonetheless, a lot of exciting things to talk about tonight. A lot of some key storylines, a lot of first time winners for the first time in a few years. So excited to get talking about it.
Yeah, certainly, Alex. I mean, it was Miami, really the strongest SKUSA Winter Series race that we have seen in the years that they've been doing it. Over 270 total entries, I believe, by the end of the weekend, which again sets a new benchmark for Winter Series. It's up there as one of the most attended races in the SKUSA non-Super Nats history, really, alongside a couple different Summer Nats races that I believe might have eclipsed 300 entries. So by far the biggest Winter Series challenge. We had 40 in X30 this year, 65 in KA Junior, the biggest class of the weekend. Another strong KA field, some strong fields of mini and micro, and even shifter, which again is a weaker field in the Winter Series just by virtue of kind of a lot of the West Coast guys not wanting to go all the way across the country for a really it's a point series, but it's not an incredibly important point series. And so the shifter numbers were down, but still up from last year when they only had, I believe it was 6 total entries. So to get some of those guys back in was really good. We had strong fields there. But we're going to start this show off talking about the X30 field. Again, 40 members strong. You had guys like Daniel Albanese coming over from Europe to run for NRMS. You had a full host of the national protagonists from last season, whether it be Ryan Norberg coming back, Alessandro D'Otulio. You had Dalton Haynes back on Sodi this weekend. You had Harley Keeble running for the first time in the Winter Series. So a number of big names, a deep field. And at the end of the weekend, two guys that had not won in quite some time came away with their first victories of the 2024 season. That would be Alessandro D'Otulio winning in the rain on Sunday, and Ryan Norberg, after what seemed like an eternity, winning for the first time since Trackhouse Motorplex at the Miami Grand Nationals in 2022. And Alex, I'm going to start with you. You came into the weekend and you said that Alessandro D'Otulio was your pick to win. Obviously, you've seen him put on a masterclass in the rain on Sunday, and you've seen him do that at SSKC before earlier in the month, or last month, I guess it was, but less than a month ago. So Alex, I'm going to start with D'Otulio because he's the more recent winner by winning on Sunday. But what did you see from him this weekend, and what were your thoughts on the overall X30 complexion as a whole?
I was impressed. I mean, I know I picked him to win it, but at the end of the day, from what we saw on Friday, where it was a bit of a head scratcher for him, he was quick in KA as expected. In the X30 class, he was bouncing around the top end of the top 10, maybe even the teens for a lot of practice and happy hours. So going into Saturday and Sunday, I wasn't ultra confident in my pick, but he did me proud, right? I mean, we gotta talk about the KA stuff as well, because he swept KA and he was second X30 Saturday, first on Sunday. So I mean, a first, and a second. Obviously the DQ on Sunday for the KA, but on track of first place. So a dominant performance by the Miami native there. I mean, he was impressive. It's something that I am looking forward to for the rest of the year. I think I know I mentioned in the last week's episode that I think Sodi is going to be very strong, but I think Inter-MS, looking with how they looked, even with Danilo Albanese, not too familiar with the X30 side of things recently, at least. He's moved over to shifter. For his first race back in a single speed in quite some time. He was strong. It was a quiet top 10 for him, but I think it was impressive, and I'm excited to see what he does in rounds 3 and 4, and then obviously for the Pro Tour, he's going to be on a shifter class. But yeah, I think that team looks good, and I think it's going to be one of those teams that we can see some drivers maybe start gravitating towards. And they're on the Car Republic, they're on one of the more stronger chassis as of now. So yeah, I think DeTulio was impressive as expected, and I think he's going to be right now the favorite to go ahead and walk away with the X30 Championship come next month.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, he had a strong start to the season. You mentioned the KA field and, sweeping a weekend in KA on track. I mean, I know they had a DQ on Sunday, but really was not something with a rear bumper width infraction that would have had a significant impact. So, nonetheless, a really impressive weekend for Ale. And I mean, to win 3 of the 4 main events with the 4th main event coming in second is super impressive. Also for NRMS, they had Colin Wood in the KA side of things, finishing inside the top 5 on Saturday. Had a decent run in terms of pace on Sunday as well. I believe something happened in the final in the rain that kind of pushed him back a good ways. But I mean, as a whole, I mean, that organization had a really strong start to their season. And David, going over to you here, I mean, Saturday in the X30 side of things, we saw Ryan Norberg, as you predicted, get the monkey off his back. It was kind of a day that really Norberg took until the final to establish himself as a clear dominant front runner. He did win the pole, or he came on the front row on Saturday. Pre-final was kind of in the mix. His teammate Donovan Bonilla walked away with that victory, but the final was something that we've seen a lot out of Ryan Norberg these last handful of years, coming away with his first victory of 2024. So, David, in typical Ryan fashion, a convincing win. But what were your takeaways from this weekend, both with Norberg and the RPG team as a whole?
I don't know what all this Wii stuff is about seeing Ryan Norberg win. I think this was actually, since the time I started at Kart Chaser, I believe this is the first main event win I've actually witnessed Ryan Norberg win. Believe it or not. In fact, kind of quite infamously, the first Kart Chaser event I worked as a pit reporter was the infamous broom breaking incident at the end of the season. I believe it was USPKS, where Ryan Norberg had won every race up until that point, and was beaten by Hayden Jones in the final race. And Ryan was enough of a sport to come out and let Hayden break the broom. But since that point, I have not seen very much of Ryan Norberg win. But I think I mentioned it on the podcast yesterday or last week, was that to me, Ryan Norberg heard all the noise over the past over a year that he has been winless in competition. And I know professional race car drivers pretty well, and Ryan Norberg is a professional race car driver. And when they are a driver who they're at the top of their game, and like Alex said, I think I even kind of stole his thought in the post race interview with Ryan. You know, uh, he was so close last year. I don't think there was ever a doubt in his mind that he was not still a race winning contending driver. And so my thought process always was with that Ryan Norberg was going to come right out first race of the season and do everything in his power to win it, because that takes away that talking point, that storyline from us. Now, Ryan himself in his post race interview, which I thought was just an awesome moment, made reference to Joe Turney. It was almost like a UFC call out. But, I think Ryan really thinks that he'll truly be back when he can race Joe Turney head to head and beat Joe Turney head to head. Another really interesting thought that I had, kind of playing off of what you guys were talking about with chassis, is when we were talking in the preseason discussion last week, we were really hailing the Sodi carts, and on Friday it looked like they were just going to wax the entire field between Dalton Haynes and especially Harley Keeble, who looked like he had about 2/10 on the field on Friday. Now, for whatever reason, that pace fell off, and it was the OTKs of the RPG group, as well as the Kart Republics from InterMS, that were the two dominant team chassis combinations. And I think, to your point about InterMS, we went into this weekend, and again, we are 2 races in, and this is a very, very long season. But I think it's a really interesting talking point that we were talking about Trinity Karting Group becoming the top Kart Republic manufacturer, leading company. And yet here we are one weekend in, and InterMS seems to firmly establish themselves as the leading Kart Republic team. And I wonder, like, again, to Alex's point, how that go-kart stock market is going to work. And throughout the season, how many people do we see bail over to InterMS or try to get a spot on that team? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, certainly, David. I think like it's really not going to be something that is going to be cut in or like cut in the dry basically when it comes to the Kart Republic teams. There you see Danny Formal chiming in. Ryan Norberg's going to win a lot this season. I can't say I disagree after this weekend. I mean, Norberg really put on a show on Saturday. Sunday had honestly something we were talking about in the production team as well as talking about it after the race. Had more pace than we've seen him have in the rain in quite some time. I know the result didn't quite bear itself out because he had some scuffles with Thomas Nagu, which we'll get into later, as well as with Dalton Haynes early on that race. It kind of stunted his result a little bit. But pace-wise, Norberg was on all weekend. But back to the point about Kart Republic, I think that InterMS came out the season firing. They had a ton of testing with DeTulio, which they'll have testing at every race. But I think Miami kind of being a home track, having that advantage of being able to be on track every weekend, just pounding in the laps has been something that's helped out DeTulio quite a bit. And so can't really make two conclusions when it comes to the overall archetype of the season, but certainly is something to watch when it comes to the season as a whole. And how about Jacob Kohler too? Another guy, new team in Miami coming into the season. He had a strong performance, finished inside the top 5 both days. And really, when it came to Sunday, I thought was incredibly quick in the rain. And on Saturday, had the pole position, got himself towards the box, got kind of roughed up a little bit when he started on pole in the pre-final, but had the pace to contend for the win. Had the incident with Garrison at the end of the race that took away a potential podium. So Kolar really had himself a strong weekend as well. And Brandon Carr, for what it's worth, on the Trinity Karting Group Kart Republic, had struggled all weekend in the drive. Really was kind of back into the top 10, just barely inside the top 15, and he put himself in a great spot there for the final to end up in second. So I mean, at the end of the day, it's really impressive to see kind of how diverse the teams were in a sense, because you had RPG at the front, you still had Speed Concepts with Austin and Garrison having a lot of pace, you had the different Kart Republic manufacturers, but I have to say the real winners for this weekend for me in the X30 field, you had Norberg at the front of the field having the win on Saturday, DeTulio having the win on Sunday in addition to everything he did in the KA side of things, and then Jacob Kohler. I mean, for me, he was kind of the impressive standout. It is a home track situation for him as well, but also you have to say the expectations maybe a little bit lower for him considering we haven't seen him put together a full weekend like this. We saw flashes of it last year at Trackhouse in the final round of USPKS as well as in the IME shootout. And we saw moments of it throughout the season where he would have top 5 pace at certain points. But for Kolar to get himself into the top 5, get himself on the box on Sunday, I mean, Alex, this has to be a breakout moment for Kolar, and I think it sets him up nicely for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see what Kohler can do at other racetracks, right? Because he has a lot of experience at Homestead. This is his first national podium in the pro category, so I'm really happy for the kid, and he really earned it. I mean, on Saturday, in all honesty, if it wasn't for that pre-final where he got pushed outside the top 10, he drove his way through the field. I mean, he had a chance of that win. I mean, compared to Ryan, pace-wise, he was lapping about a tenth or two faster towards the end of that race. You know, Ryan probably backed it down a bit. But I was impressed with Kolar a lot, for sure. And then you mentioned Brandon Carr as well. Finally getting a rain race, right? I mean, the UK guy didn't really get a rain race all year long last year, struggled in the latter half of the season. So to start off the year, getting some rain, getting some confidence, I think is going to be big for Brandon Carr. And ultimately, I think, because he told me afterwards, you know, they missed it a little bit on the setup. It's a scary sight for the rest of the field when it comes to the rain, to be only, you know, half a tenth off of what DeTulio is doing with a sort of missed setup. It's impressive, and I think it shows as well, like we talked about last week, right? Car Republic 1 and 2 in the rain. Obviously Ryan on Saturday on the RPG Cosmic, but I want to shout out Danny Formal real quick, because he said that Ryan sucks in the rain. The top 4 is like a super Nats win. Maybe Ryan can learn a little bit from you, Danny, and maybe you could do some lessons with them. maybe Ryan can grow about half a foot and put on some muscle to shift that go-kart around like you. But yeah, nonetheless, Ryan, like you mentioned, Emory, not notoriously an amazing rain driver. So I think he told us in the post-race interview as well. I mean, he's happy with the fourth place, and he really feels like even with getting into it with Navu, it didn't really hinder his race at all because that was the best he could do pace wise. So yeah, I think going back to your point, Kolar, impressive. He's still learning, right? I mean, it's his sophomore season in the senior category. He's learning, I think, the driving standard that the senior guys put on, and I think he's starting to take the gloves off a little bit, get the elbows out, and he's not afraid to fight back. So I'm excited to see what he can do at other tracks this year.
Yeah, and I mean, David, and going from Kohler, who was an impressive performance as well, were there any other guys that really stood out to you when it came to both the rain racing, but also the weekend as a whole?
Well, I think Jacob Kolar definitely was a name that we did not anticipate really being in the mix. I mean, I feel like we were all kind of surprised and pleasantly surprised when his name started coming to the top of the timesheets. You mentioned that pole position. I think we were all just kind of like, have you ever seen that USC clip of like Joe Rogan and all them going like this? I think that was us in the broadcast booth when he got the pole. But, to Alex's point, really, really impressive racecraft. Yes, there's a little bit of inexperience there. The pro categories in karting, as we found out this weekend, and we're going to talk a lot about later on, very much elbows out, lots of contact. You have to earn respect in them. That's been very, very clear and apparent. And drivers who have a little bit less experience typically, get shuffled out even when they have the pace. Another point I wanted to make about Brendan Carr specifically is that maybe there's some question about dry pace, but it's also important to say he was sick on Saturday, so I wonder how much his health came into it with his pace. And karting is an extremely extremely physical sport. If you're not 100%, it's going to hurt your pace a little bit. So I feel like the evaluation of Brandon Carr, especially, is going to have to come on a weekend where he's 100% the entire weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Carr, he had some good pace this weekend. I think at the end of the day, him being sick on Saturday maybe skewed a little bit of perception. I mean, certainly still even in on Sunday when they had a couple of dry sessions, didn't look like he was all the way there, but certainly I mean, they'll have time. This is the first race of the new team, first race for Carr on the Kart Republic chassis. There's going to be some hiccups here and there. So a good effort from Carr over the course of the weekend to kind of fight off the sickness, get himself on the podium on Sunday, and come away with a good result. But I want to talk to you guys real quickly about some of the guys that maybe didn't have quite the impact that you would have expected this weekend. And I mean, I really want to start with Diego Ramos, because we talked coming into this weekend, kind of the consistency that he had through the course of the 2023 season. And this time, I mean, again, really struggled to put himself in the top five throughout the weekend. On Saturday, came away with a incident in the final that kind of hindered his results. Was kind of stuck in the midfield all weekend long. So for me, Ramos was kind of the example of someone that struggled a good bit through the weekend. But Alex, David, were there any guys that you saw over the course of the weekend that you talked to that maybe came away disappointed with their pace and their ultimate results?
Yeah, I mean, I think David alluded to it already, but Harley Keeble. I mean, he was so fast on Friday, and he in every interview afterwards, we talked to him even off camera, off the air, and it's a head scratcher. Where'd the pace go? I mean, he was to me a shoe-in podium after we saw on Friday. I mean, putting up consistently 2/10 on the field, it's impressive, and it was almost unheard of. And then to be at some points on Sunday, I mean, 2 seconds off in the rain was weird. And I think part of it possibly is the junior and younger categories with the new rubber putting down a lot of tire, a lot of rubber onto the track. And I think when the sodies start to get stuck, right, it tends to the cart is not as free as it used to be. And I think that's why on Friday possibly we saw the cart really quick. It was free. It just rained a few days prior, so it was a brand new racetrack essentially. And so that tends to play into Sodi's hands. And I think they weren't really able to anticipate, the grip levels of the racetrack. And I mean, Harley told me that on Saturday, in the pre-final, I believe, when the track got pretty stuck to the ground. He said, yeah, they just didn't anticipate it. They didn't, go ahead of the curve, ahead of the racetrack. But from then on, nothing explains 2 seconds off. You could be half second maybe, but for a guy like Harley Keeble, who is one of the most talented young rising stars that we have in our field, to be from one end of the spectrum to the other, day to day, it's interesting. And I think even with Dalton was quick, but again, not as quick. I mean, looking at the lap times right now, I mean, he was 1.5 seconds off on Sunday. So it's interesting to see what happened to the Sodi guys. And I'm sure they're going to bounce back. I mean, they're a strong team. They're still my team in terms of who's going to win the Pro Tour. I think one of those two guys is going to do it. So I think they're going to turn it around and figure it out for next month. But it's a bit of a head scratcher for me.
Yeah, it's especially a head scratcher because Sodi in pretty much every class but X30 was consistently fast throughout the weekend. I mean, Isambard never really lost pace. In fact, I think Isambard in shifter was consistently getting faster throughout the weekend, or more competitive perhaps. And in some of the junior classes, there was always a Sodi up at the front. So I wonder what the difference is with the X30 machines. I mean, and you mentioned it, even in the rain, especially in the rain, actually, which, I don't necessarily think you're super gripped up in the rain. Maybe I'm incorrect on that one, but yeah, some of the pace loss was just really, really puzzling and hard to explain from the Sodis and X30.
Yeah, and to be fair, the rain difference is going to be something that you'll see. I mean, setups vary, and it's very possible that over the course of 2 sessions, the Sodi guys just didn't quite get it right in the rain, and so that excess of grit didn't apply. And I know on Dalton's front, I mean, it was pretty apparent from the get-go that he was struggling for pure setup. And we know from Harley Keeble's experience in the rain that we saw at IME or throughout the year, throughout last year and throughout previous years as well in the UK, that it's not going to be an issue with him coming from the UK with a lot of experience there. So both of them to be struggling that much it's telling that there was a setup issue, and it could have very well been different than the setup issues that plagued them in the dry, because I know that what you run in the rain is completely different from what you run in the dry. You're running with a narrow rear, wide in front. I mean, axle changes, front alignment changes. You'll raise 4, 5, 6 teeth on the gear. Like, there's a lot of things that go into a rain setup. And so, I mean, to me, it's very possible that Sodi had one issue on Saturday that maybe was the difference between them being 2/10 and 4/10 off or being on the pace. And then on Sunday, they missed something in the rain, whether it be axle setup maybe was off. And again, they had testing in the rain over the course of the last week in Miami. But at the same time, you haven't played with those exact track conditions. It was a monsoon before the pre-final on on Sunday. And then the final was kind of a drying track, more or less. So even from session to session, there was a lot of difference. So I don't know. I think that there was certainly a lot that kind of went into the setup changes, but I'm with you guys. I think Harley Keeble certainly would have looked for this weekend to be a good bit better than it was. I mean, at this point, he's more or less out of contention for the Winter Series championship and kind of the preseason karting, so there's not as much heightened stakes on it, but you still want to start out the year as good as possible. I don't think either of the two main Sodi guys in X30 did quite as well as they would have expected. But on the shifter side of things, they had some strong moments with Alan Isambard. And we're going to talk about the shifter field, which coincidentally was led by a guy who's been watching this and been commenting on our stuff, in Danny Formal. He came in with 2 breakthrough wins this past weekend, and we're going to talk about them right after this message from our partners at Acceleration Kart Racing.
Colin, I need a new 219 chain. I need a 77 tooth sprocket. I need some more chain lube, and I need it probably as soon as tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Dude, are you even listening? We need this to run this weekend.
Want anything else?
What do you mean?
I already got it in the car on Acceleration Kart Racing's online store, bro. All orders over $200 get free shipping.
Oh, throw in a set of tires.
Done.
Everything you need, all in one place, and shipped to your door for free on orders of $200 or more. Exclusions apply. Shop AKR.com.
All right, back here. Thank you to Acceleration Kart Racing for sponsoring us as we get set to go for the second segment. We get ready to talk about shifter racing, a weekend that came in with lower entries than you normally see at the pro level, but at the same time, also more entries than we've seen in seasons past at the Winter Series. And you had high level competition. You had Danny Formal making his return less than 2 months after a Supernats victory. You had Alan Isambard, of course, last year with a very strong performance, racing against AJ Myers. Mateus Morgado, the former world champion, making his first ever start in the U.S. in the shifter categories. Guys like Gavin Bailiff, Vincenzo Saraceno, Michael Riccio, Anthony Mortella came in as well, looking to build off of promising campaigns in 2023. And it produced some good racing. We had some good highlights, but really, to me, the main story of the weekend, Danny Formal kind of picks up right where he left off in Vegas, put up 2 wins in resounding fashion. It wasn't always smooth sailing. He had to fight off against Alan Isambard a couple of times, specifically in the pre-finals. But when it came down to it, the big man, as Xander likes to say, Danny Formal, representing Rawson Performance Group, came away with a victory in both days. Cooper Becklin, of course, joined him on the box on the second day for RPG, making it a double podium for them. Other guys with strong performance. We saw Mateus Morgado up there. We saw Alan Isambard as well. Gavin Bailiff had the pace. I mean, Alex, I'll start with you. For a guy like Danny Formal, I mean, he's won 4 Supernats. He's been up at the front so many times. He has some, really, to me, honestly, probably the most stacked resume of any shifter driver that's been racing in the U.S. over the recent years. I mean, where do you start with this when it comes to his performance this weekend?
I mean, we've come to expect it, right? It's one of those things where it's to the point where he's done. You can only do so much to impress me before it's like, okay, well, it's Danny Formal, right? I mean, that being said, on Saturday, right, Alan Isambard was fast. I mean, he put up almost 3/10 on the field in qualifying, which is unheard of in shifter. And so I was a little bit worried for Danny in terms of, okay, maybe this is gonna be Alan's weekend. Finally get to the top box there, top of the podium, first time in a few years for him in a national scene. So I was hoping for that for Alan. Then mixed conditions came, and really just Danny Formal became Danny Formal again. And so it's one of those things where he's inevitable, right? He outdrove, in my opinion, Alan a little bit in the Saturday final. He did him with the over under in turn 1, and then from there it's just a pace machine. So really impressive. And then on Sunday with the mixed conditions, obviously I actually expected Alan to be even quicker, because for a kid who's grown up at that racetrack, knows, like he mentioned in the interview after the race, he knows where all the spots where it puddles. He knows exactly where to put his cart. So for Danny to be, that much faster than the field in the rain for a majority of that second half of the day, impressive, right? It's something. It just alludes to how talented that guy is, and what a physical specimen too, right? I mean, that is the big man. He can shift the cart better than anybody else. He almost doesn't have to turn the wheel, right? He just shifts some weight, that thing rotates. So it's incredible to watch that guy drive. And I got a firsthand point of view, right? Because I was in turn 5 with the camera, within a foot or two of him, and it's incredible to watch that chassis flex. And yeah, I mean, what a authoritative stamp on the field that he put, and it's kind of he put the field on watch, I think, for the majority and the rest of this year.
Yeah, and he had 9 laps in that final that were quicker than the next fastest lap. I mean, laps 1, 2, and 3 were slower. And again, I also was partially the track condition too. I mean, the Pro Shifter final was on a drying track, so we saw really, really wet conditions at the start. But the last 9 laps to be quicker than what anyone else was able to do is insanely dominant. And I don't think it gets talked about enough. I mean, we saw Formal the first couple laps building out a gap, and then we simply didn't really see him again the rest of the broadcast until we got to the final lap. That's how dominant he was. And I mean, again, like you mentioned, Alex, there's nothing that he can do that really would surprise you, so to speak, but to just be that dominant, to really just leverage himself so well, I mean, so consistent in the rain is super impressive. And I think just a classic Formal masterpiece. Saturday was impressive too. I mean, first half of the day, I don't think it would be unfair to say that Danny kind of was at a pace disadvantage. We saw him qualifying Isambard put it on pole by multiple tenths. We saw in the pre-final Isambard went toe-to-toe with him, but come final time, Danny was able to kind of put himself in the right spot with the racing side of things, made a beautiful crossover on Isambard for the second consecutive race session, both in the pre-final and the final on lap number 1, put himself in the lead there with a nice pass, and then ultimately was able to get himself away from some of the chaos that happened in that race and walk away with the victory. And Dave, I mean, we get to the rest of the pro shifter field, another strong showing from Isambard from a pace standpoint, but maybe not quite the results that he would have indicated. How do you assess Alan Isambard's weekend?
Yeah, I think that that Alan had a pretty good weekend, all things considered. He probably wouldn't tell you that, but being a local and getting beat at your own track, I mean, that's difficult. But from my seat, and I sit in a very cheap seat, I was impressed with Alan Isambard. We talked before a lot about the top 3 guys we saw in this field, and those were Danny, of course. I think I also picked Danny, if I remember correctly, to win. I just want to stick that in there real quick. But if it's not Danny or if it's not Morgado, and I always kind of nothing against Mateus, but you guys mentioned the struggles of jumping back into a shifter cart here on this side of the pond. There was always going to be a little bit of a learning curve. He was definitely impressive as a front runner. And those were the 3 guys we really talked about. And, I was super, super impressed that Gavin Bailiff put his name into that conversation and really mixed it up at the front of the pro shifter field. I think on a week where we were talking about a short field and not as many shifters as we'd like to see, certainly more shifters than last year, but still, compared to the last race we were all at Supernats, you kind of look at the shifter field and you go, oh, that's a little bit disappointing. But considering that there were 4 super, super competitive guys at the front, with some potential, like with Vincenzo coming up in there and almost making it a 5 cart race at one point, I believe, on Saturday, I just think that, and this is something that, again, I'm an outsider. I don't have a big karting background. I have a big racing background. I love all forms of motorsport. And the more and more kart races I go to, the more and more I realize I absolutely love shifter kart racing. It is so cool. Yes, are the races, as close as X30? Most of the time they're not. But when you get an X30 style shifter kart race, or even just, I just feel like so much in shifter kart racing, there's always just these like jaw-dropping, exciting moments. Even if the entire race, is covered by, 4 seconds over the top 3, you still got something super, super entertaining in that 22 lap feature. And I'm just really loving shifter kart racing. I think it's really cool. And personally, I'm kind of disappointed that there's not as much support of it from a competition standpoint consistently as a grouping like X30. So I guess I'll kind of defer to the folks who have a bigger background in kart racing. I guess I'll start with you, Alex. What has shifter racing got to do to start to kind of build to that X30 style, big field, constantly having the big drivers at all the races, hammering it out? Because I think the product is just absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think shifter racing is the creme de la creme of karting. Not to take anything away from what the pro guys do in X30, because I think they, race in, race out, those X30 senior guys put on one of the best races we see all weekend. And like you mentioned, David, the shifter guys, even if it's a blowout race, just watching those guys wheel that go-kart is fun to watch. And so for me, it's frustrating and tough to see, a class where it's 10 carts. Expect to see more, for the Pro Tour and for the USPKS, entry wise. But nonetheless, I think it's one of those things where, for one, it's an intimidating class, right? As much as usually drivers can go from single speed to shifter karting and pick it up pretty quickly. We see Mateus do it. And I'll get to Mateus in a little bit on how impressed I was with him, actually. But it's an intimidating class. You have a guy like Danny, why would you even want to go to shifter if Danny's going to go over there and dominate, right? But it's tough. I think for starters, and we're seeing series do it, right, where they're putting money on the line, so it's all of a sudden people are going to want to go over there and see what they've got. But shifter karting it's expensive, right? I mean, no matter what, racing's expensive, whether you're doing micro, mini, KA X30 shifter, but shifter at the end of the day is the most expensive form of karting. It's the most expensive rebuild. It's one of those things where it's a tough class to get started in. And a lot of times before people even go into shifter, they go to cars. And we've heard Formal say it, right, where he recommends people do shifter before they go to cars, and he's been a huge voice for the shifter side of things in terms of why it needs to grow. And I agree with him. And I think it starts with different series putting money on there, and we're seeing it this year, and I'm excited for it, and that's why I'm excited for shifter racing. And I think we need to, the KZ package. It's important to come to be in the States. And we see it as Supernats, right? When the Europeans come over here, it becomes one of the best races we see every single year. And so that's why I think we need to promote it better, need to advertise it better. It needs to be a class that we look at as the F1 of karting. And I think it is a spectacle, and yeah, I'm in agreement with you, David.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think shifter racing is one of the biggest spectacles you're going to find in kart racing. Even when you don't have quite as much field depth as what you would see it as the Supernat side of things, there's still a lot to look forward to. If we're looking at what's kind of stunting the growth, I'd say there's three main things. So the first one, the most pressing one, and in my opinion, the hardest one to correct is the cost. Like, if you look at a K, let's start kind of from the cheapest and go up. I mean, you start with Briggs Racing, 206 Racing, kind of the cheapest way. You can more or less run a 206 weekend on a local scale for less than $150 if you do it right. Including fixed costs, it gets more expensive, but the engine costs aren't really there. You can run multiple races on one set of tires depending on the tire compound you're racing with. Engine rebuilds aren't all that frequent, and you can run a perfectly capable, extremely competitive 206 budget at most levels for really, really, really cheap. So that kind of brings a lot of the grassroots guys into the 206 side of things. Then you have the KA package, which you have more national races available to you. And for them, the costs are certainly up more from what you would expect. Certainly, the Yamaha KT100 days back pre-2017 are certainly a good bit cheaper in 100cc racing than the KAs are today. I mean, you're talking anywhere from 40 to 50 grand going into a competitive national season. And that's without even including running numerous national seasons. I mean, to be truly competitive in KA, you have to put up a good amount of money. And you're talking about engine rebuilds every 4 to 5 hours on the engine to get it at its peak life. You're talking having to have multiple engines in the set. And you're also having to talk about multiple sets of tires for practice each weekend, which kind of separates it as well as the engine from 206 yard. And it's been more on tires, more on engine. To me, KA racing is kind of that bridge from the local regional to the national level. And we see it play out where regional series KA is more popular. And on the national level, still a lot of guys will run KA. X30, the jump up isn't quite as big of a jump from a pricing standpoint as what it has been in recent years, but it's still going to be more expensive than KAs are. You're talking about now suddenly running anywhere from 6 to 7 total sessions of tires over the course of a 4-day weekend. You're talking about having really a lot of engine expenses from blueprinting. And if you have an in-house engine manufacturer and your own team building your engines, then that adds to the built-in team cost. If you're getting an engine for yourself personally, it's going to be slightly more expensive than than a KA package would be. And the rebuild hours are usually relatively similar. You're not going to get more than a race or two on an X30 engine. But the most expensive engine package by far is the shifter. The starting price is significantly more expensive. The tire wear, you're really only going to get 3 sessions the most on a set of tires before they degrade to the point where it'd be nonsensical to run them. And the rebuilding price of them, you have to get it rebuilt far more frequently than any other. There's more mechanical issues that add into the variable costs. So if you're running a shifter kart, and karting is naturally going to be a high budget sport when it comes to the national level, and there's certainly been efforts to reduce that. There's things that have been worked on that hopefully will be worked on in the future to continue to make it more affordable to some degree. Shifter is always going to be the most expensive category, no matter what you do if you're trying to run it on the national scene. On the local scene, there's a little bit of different arguments for that, and that's not really a discussion that I'm qualified to have on that side of things. But on the national level, there's very few things that can be done to make Shifter less expensive than its X30 counterparts. And so with that, the costs are one thing that drives away the massive side fields, because if you can run and get a field of 40 or 50 in X30 or 60 in KA, that's going to be more fun. You're going to do better at that than having to put together a shoestring shifter budget. The other two things are maybe less prominent in a sense, but also more fixable. I think you could argue the style of racing is something that is just not for some people. Like, a lot of people love to see the close shifter racing. It is a ton of fun when you see the Supernat style shifter races, the Rock Vegas Supernat or Rock Vegas final that we saw, where it was Formal versus the GFC boys versus Krimmers and Hunter Pickett. When you can have 4 or 5 guys fighting for the win, it is elite racing. This year already, we saw really good racing in Miami. But if you're a midfield type of guy and your kind of ceiling is a 3rd or 4th place finish, then it's a lot more tempting to go for the less physically demanding, less mentally taxing option of racing an X30, where it doesn't take quite as much thought to go through every single lap, and the learning curve isn't quite as much. And so that's another reason that I think some people go away, is it's just not quite as much bang for your buck when it comes to the racecraft side of things. And then the third thing is just simply the physical and mental demand. It kind of goes along. The learning curve to get good in a shifter takes a while. And I know we've seen Dalton Haynes, for example, come on and get a national podium in shifter right away. We've seen Connor Zillish do it in the past, and we've seen Mateus Morgado in recent times adapt to shifter racing very well. But those are kind of the exceptions. The reality is, if you want to be consistently really good in the shifter, you're not the most elite of elite drivers, it's a year-long process, really, 1 to 2 years to really get shifter down. I mean, Talon Yackel is one of the best shifter drivers in the U.S. that we have currently right now, and it's taken him a couple of years to get to that point. Michael Riccio, the same sort of thing. It's like a 2-year process. Gavin Bailiff started shifter racing more frequently at the end of 2022, and he's just now getting to the point where you would say his results match his single speed efforts. And when you run in a class like shifter, where really we don't have any feeder series or feeder categories into it, there's going to be a learning curve that there simply isn't quite that much in the X30 side of things. Like, you can't prepare really for shifter racing prior to getting a shifter. It's a whole new animal. Some guys can adapt really quick. I mean, at the end of the day, it's still driving a kart. You're still going to be able to find speed. But with that learning curve and that amount of physical demands and the mental demand that can come for some people racing a shifter, I think that's the last thing that kind of brings people away. And so the result is you have some people that are really fast in a single speed that just don't want to try it, which, power to them. It's kind of something that if we had more incentive, more money coming into it, maybe that would change things. If they got more spotlight, that would certainly change things and maybe bring some of those top single speed guys in. The midfield is always going to be a questionable thing, because, again, if you're in the midfield, why not run a KA category when it's cheaper? There's 60 people in it. It's more affordable, and the style of racing is more conducive to close wheel-to-wheel action every single lap. So I think the way to kind of solve that midfield is maybe you bring in more introductory shifter classes. You have more restrictions on it, kind of similar to what Pro Tour did back in the day with S2, S4, and other shifter programs as well. Maybe even bringing in some kind of mini shifter categories. We've seen the 60cc shifters out there in the past. I think that's something to explore as well. So I think that's kind of how you build the midfield, is bringing in a more feeder series. I think on the bigger scale with the upfront drivers, you need more of a purse. You need kind of more direct incentive for those drivers to join in. And then the last part of it, the financial part of it. I mean, karting is always naturally going to have that uncomfortable discussion about a budget. But on the shifter side of things, I think it's more prevalent than others. And until the whole industry finds a way to kind of bring that down just a bit, I think there's always going to be some de-incentivized points to shifter racing. And I mean, I think there's certainly room to grow the field. I want to see it grow. I want to see those 30, 40 kart shifter fields at every pro race we go to. But I think it's going to take some work, and there's some natural disadvantages that's always going to carry.
Damn, Emory,
Here's
absolutely cooked.
here's the thing, right? Because and I could be completely wrong, but and I'm not maybe qualified to say this, but I think one of the biggest issues that shifter karting faces is that I believe it's looked at as X30 senior is almost seemingly looked at as above shifter, and whether I believe that or not is for a different time, but to me, shifter karting it's the epitome of karting, right? It is, you know, objectively looked at as probably the hardest thing to hop in and get used to because, like Emery alluded to, every single form of karting up until the shifter days are single speed, right? So the driving style is almost the same. You have, better brakes, faster engine. You get into a shifter, the driving style is different. You have front brakes now. You have shifter. You have gears to go out there and shift. So it's a completely different go kart, and we've seen so many guys who are good take a year. It's essentially a gap year for those guys because they're out there. They're so used to winning that they go out there in the shifter class and get beat up on a little bit, and it's frustrating. And why would you want to race something that maybe for a few months you're not very good at? And so I think a lot of it is even though the X30 senior and shifter class is looked at as equals in terms of the pro category, it seemingly looks as though it's almost like X30 senior is put above the shifter class, and maybe that's because of entry count, and it's because of just of sheer popularity. But to me, the shifter class, for it to grow even more, and everything that Emery said, I mean, I 100% back. It needs to almost be put that one step above senior to give them that extra incentive to want to go out there and move up a class. Because right now, X30 senior is a destination series, or class, should I say? And a lot of the guys don't have a reason to go to shifter.
That's what's such an interesting point you just brought up. I mean, you say that X30 is almost looked at as the top class, and I mean, look at the scheduling this weekend. What was the last event each day? It was X30. It wasn't shifter. Now it's Supernats. It's shifter, and so I guess, and I suppose we don't have to talk about this the whole show, but I guess my final kind of thought, at least right now, in terms of shifter, was we hear a lot of, Emery just, I mean, that monologue was absolutely unbelievable, just laying it all out in very, easy to understand terms. It sounds like the big positive would, or at least the big incentive, the big carrot to go to shifter racing is prestige, right? And so it sounds like both you, Emery, and Alex are coming to the same conclusion, which, to bring it up, you're not going to be able to knock the cost down significantly enough to, certainly you're not going to bring it anywhere close to an X30 budget. You're going to have to find ways to make it more and more prestigious. Is that the only incentive of shifter racing, or are there other incentives that a driver can have? I mean, I guess Danny also made the point, which, and Danny's proving that. I mean, the man is racing for Andretti in the Rolex 24 starting this week, right? So clearly there is a path, if you're thinking about car racing, to excel in a shifter kart. So are those the two incentives, thinking about a car racing career plus the prestige?
I think that if you look at what translates the most to a car racing, there's many different opinions out here. I mean, some people look at the X30 side of things, the smoothness that it takes to really excel in an X30 is more applicable to car racing as than a shifter side of things. And some people point to the amount of discipline you have to have, the physicality of it, and physically challenging. The shifters, the closest things that you're going to find in karting to a car, and if anything, is more physically demanding than some entry level car series. So, I mean, shifter racing, like the challenge of it, I guess, and the amount of discipline it requires is certainly something that feeds itself well into car racing. We've seen a lot of the best prospects to come out of recent years from karts have at least dipped their hand into kart or into shifter racing. I mean, Britt Cruz did it for, I believe, a year or so before he jumped into a car, or well, alongside. I mean, Brent did a ton of racing on the side of everything, all the way back to when he was 7 or 8 running dirt races. So I mean, he's been an example of someone that put himself in the shifter ring, and I think that it's pretty clear where it helped him in some senses. And Connor Zilish as well had the one-off weekend in NOLA where he tried himself in shifter and really did better on debut than anyone we've seen in recent memory. And then, I mean, we've seen Dalton Haynes put himself in the ring as well. I mean, again, the guys that are really serious about this and have aspirations of the prospect, a lot of them will see that challenge and want to go for it. I mean, Dalton doing the triple at a track house, part of the whole intrigue of that was he had never really tried a shifter up until the month leading into that and testing it. And he did a lot of laps going into it to prepare. And I mean, looking back at Dalton's comment from earlier about how like people really don't understand exactly how physically demanding it is, and X30 guys can't just hop in and be that fast. Gavin Bailiff is the perfect example. I mean, his first real national level shifter, as I can remember, starts 2022. He was up front the whole weekend in K, was dominant against a pretty good field at his home track. And mind you, he had a good amount of testing laps at Cincinnati in a shifter before that. And he goes in and he struggles to be top 5, right? And that's at his home track. He has a million laps around, can't quite do it. And then the next year on the national scale, let's face it, like I love Gavin. I think he's a really talented driver, but it took him a full year basically to find himself consistently running those top 4, top 5 paces. Most of the time he was closer to 9th, 10th, 11th in 20 kart fields. And we're seeing now that progression of the driver, but it takes so much time to get there that it can be something where it gets discouraging. And so, I mean, I think the challenge of it certainly is incentive to go to more of a car racing feel. I don't think there's a consensus on whether or not it's more applicable to car racing than normal car racing would be. I think if you're looking at it from the standpoint of impressing future team owners, I really kind of have my doubts about that in terms of a feasible, consistent strategy when it comes to looking at kart racing as a whole. And I mean, we could talk for hours on that. I know Alex has similar kind of thought process on this when it comes to, you don't really go kart racing for the purpose of attracting scouts, because there's so many different things people look at. And oftentimes motorsports is not a fair game when it comes to progressing from karts to cars. So I think, yes, there is some value in going to shifter racing to get yourself prepared for a car career. I don't know how effective of an incentive that would be. So I really do think like that side of things, there's going to be some drivers that will always go for the challenge. I really wish we got to see more Brent in a shifter cart. I wish we saw Connor more in a shifter cart. I hope we see a little bit more Dalton Haynes running shifter at some point. But I can't really say that the pro aspirations would be a massive focal point in them being more incentivized to go towards the shifter route, unless you started seeing some scholarships or something being put in place specifically for shifter drivers. That could be something that I could see incentivizing people to come over if they had the option to get like a $60,000 scholarship. It would have to be pretty high money, I would imagine. But ultimately, I think that shifter, the bigger thing is simply going to be the spotlight on the karting scene. I think if you're a top level karting driver and we can make the destination in the US being a top level shifter driver, as opposed to having this dual kind of system between X30 and KA, and we kind of push up shifter even more than it already is, I think then eventually you will start to see at least more of the top guys. You might not have the field depth that you're going to want to have just based off of that, but you can certainly get something started. And Alex, I mean, I know this is something that you've kind of thought about a lot as well, being in the karting scene, but I mean, what else do you have to add into this?
I think you hit the nail on the head there on your last point. Something that David and I talked about on the car ride to the airport, actually, of, I'm not going to name drop any specific, car series, but I think if there was a scholarship available for specifically the shifter guys, even the X30 as well, but the shifter guys, if there was something where you go in a shifter and you finish, first, second, third, whatever it may be, yes, the prize money is an incentive, but like we mentioned, a lot of guys who go to shifter are usually trying to prepare for cars. And granted, you could do that on the side for a test day, but these guys want to get experience, wheel to wheel racing a shifter class. And if there was any car series that wanted to make an investment on a specific class, I mean, the shifter guys specifically, it would definitely draw the attention of the guys in X30 senior and X30 junior, even to maybe skip senior and go to shifter and take that risk because of the aspirations of wanting to be a car driver. I agree with you, Emory, that I think there's not one specific class that prepares you for car racing. I think shifter is universally agreed upon, probably the best one. But I've seen guys go from 206K, X30, and be very, very quick in a car. Some guys just adapt better to a car. And I think some of it as well is you got to think about the fact that a lot of the guys in karting, they're trying to develop the budget to possibly go car racing. Granted, karting has now become kind of a destination sport. You can make a living off of doing karting. But for the guys that want to go car racing, why would you take the risk of going shifter racing and spending that year and a half that's going to take you to get back to the top step when you can just go and do single speed stuff that you're quick in, and it'll be a better look for sponsors. But yeah, back to your point, I think for sure that was the key thing, right? There needs to be some sort of incentive, some sort of scholarship possibly to almost make shifter racing, even senior racing, but shifter racing, almost the first step in any sort of series for car racing.
Emory, you made a point that I just really need to address very quickly. You mentioned that shifter racing is probably not going to impress a car racing team owner. I can tell you this, that pretty much nothing outside of a blank check impresses a car racing team owner. Speaking of blank checks, we've got some bills to pay. We'll be right back.
Brandon, why are there all these charges for just over $200 from Acceleration Kart Racing's website?
That's because AKR gives you free shipping on orders of $200 or more within the continental US.
Okay, but I thought you were just getting a pair of gloves. That's what, $70?
But if I'm getting a new pair of gloves, I might as well get a new pair of shoes to match. And then on top of that, I'll get a neck brace because with the shipping, it's basically free.
Yeah, I do not think the math checks out on that.
Everything you need, all in one place and shipped to your door for free for orders of $200 or more. Exclusions apply. Spend responsibly. Shop AKR.com.
Welcome back to Grid Talk, sponsored by Acceleration Kart Racing. You just saw the outstanding performance in that ad break by our resident Chiefs fan, Brandon, who put up a really solid, really good, great acting there. I mean, I wish his Dolphins were a little bit better in the field so that he could even out and be happier. But hey, good ad debut for Brandon. And thank you to the guys at Acceleration Kart Racing for being our partner for the 2024 season. Check out all of the products that they have online. It is truly one of the best sites you're going to find out there on the kart racing side of things. So getting into...
I just noticed that you changed your beanie. Where'd the Chiefs beanie go?
That's what I was laughing about.
I had a Chiefs beanie on? Never heard of it. You must be thinking of someone else. I mean, I'll gladly support UNC, top 5 basketball team and everything. I mean, Alex, I heard your Gators are doing pretty well tonight.
Who's a Gators fan? I don't think I go to the school. It's a rough time to be a.
Must be a different school in Gainesville, Florida. Must be a different school in Gainesville, Florida. And David, I mean, can't really do too much college banter with you. I think you're a little bit out of our age range on that one. But hey, I mean,
I thought that joke was going in a completely different direction.
Oh man, no, but your Indianapolis Colts. I mean, I'm sure they're back from Cancun at this point. They've had a solid week and a half off, so I mean, it's a good start. But hey, speaking of good starts, we had quite the start to the season when it came to drama off the track in 2024, and it almost exclusively happen in the form of some of the battles in our pro categories. And we've already mentioned a lot of these guys, Gavin Bailiff and Alan Isambard, two of the guys that ran up at the front of the field on the shifter side of things. They had a lot of, in a sense, a lot of battling. Some was clean, some was a little bit more debatable, but I think both of them ended the weekend really at each other's throats. And we have a video to play of kind of all of the things that happened over the course of this past weekend between the two, because there was a lot of on-track incidents and a lot of off-track sort of discussion that started around it. And we want to hear both of their perspectives before we get set to go and talk about it ourselves, because there's a lot to talk about this one and from some other incidents over the course of the rest of the weekend.
Yesterday I got into it once again in the final. Today you guys found each other on track. Describe how it went from your point of view.
I came through the field. I caught Gavin, passed him. I was faster because it's my home track, so I know the wet line and I know all that stuff. And I mean, if we would have worked together, we would have caught Cooper for sure, 100%, because I almost caught him before the end. But he just kept dive on me stupidly, and we lost so much time. And at one point, I pushed him wide, and that was it.
It's just frustrating to have to race against that all of the time. I mean, I was clean moves. I knew I didn't have quite the pace on him, but he was making mistakes when he passed me. So if you make a mistake, unfortunately, I'm going to have to pass you back. But then for him to just dump me at the end of the straightaway, no break me in a very high-speed corner, and then just leave me sitting there in the middle of the track, that's just dangerous. It's not racing. It's just bumper cars at that point.
So this really, it lasted over 2 days and basically 3 full sessions that we saw Isambard and Bailiff go at each other. And the first session that we really saw was the final on Saturday. And mind you, for Alan Isambard, it was disappointing in the first place to be fighting someone that wasn't Danny Formal at that point in the race. And his racing side of things was not as impressive as I feel like he would have wanted it to be in that final. I mean, he had the pace in qualifying to qualify and pull by almost 3/10. He was good in the pre-final, but when it came down to it, he put himself in the situation where he could not shake free of Gavin Bailiff and Mateus Morgado and Vincenzo Saraceno, but especially Bailiff. And it all came to a head with the incident coming down the back straightaway between turn 4 and turn 5. And for me, everything else up to this point was just hard racing and something that you see pretty much every other race in a shifter category. But I want to get one more look at this incident down between turn 4 and turn 5, and then get you guys' take on this. And I'll start with Alex on this one to see kind of what you thought about that initial incident on the track.
Yeah, I mean, we got a first. I got a front review of that one. I mean, Gavin got the move done right around the outside, and then Alan seemingly just we see it a lot in a multitude of classes, right? So it's not just Alan that has done this, but it goes back to sort of the swerving that we're trying to eliminate in karting, but not really swerving. It was more, and I spoke to Gavin about this as well, right? He was guiding him down the racetrack, trying to pinch him off a little bit, but Gavin had already had essentially the move done. He was on the inside of turn 5, and it was essentially, I don't want to say his corner, right? Because you could definitely do somebody around the outside of turn 5, but at that point, it's almost better off to try to go for the over-under, the crossover move, whatever you want to do. And so it looked like, and from what I heard from Gavin as well, Alan, kept moving the wheel a little bit to the right. Gavin had his wheels straight. We don't have the onboards, so it's taking people's word for it. But from what I saw from the outside as well, that's what it looked like. And not taking away from what Alan was able to do on the racetrack. But I think it's one of those things where they're both lucky to walk out unscathed, because that could have been a lot worse. I mean, they both were facing the opposite direction of the racetrack at one point and somehow kept it straight. So for one, great driving both those guys, but for sure, I think Alan was definitely in the wrong on this one, in my opinion.
Yeah, David, do you have anything to add or any disagreements on that?
No, I agree for the most part that Alan was probably more in the wrong than Gavin was. And Alan, to his credit, owned up to it. You heard him in that clip owning up to it, and that doesn't make it any more right to just send somebody into the corner. But one very interesting thing I noticed in that replay, seeing it a couple more times, yeah, Allen definitely sent Bailiff, but if we watch it again, it's something that I hadn't picked up on until just right about now. It almost looks like Bailiff maybe slowed down a little bit more going into the corner, and that may just be a visual, might be a visual fool there, but it almost looks like he brake tested him a little bit. I don't know, but certainly Isambard did not hit the brake at the same time. So maybe that was when he made the decision. He's slowing down early. I'm not going to slow down at all.
I mean, come on. It's two kart links, right? I get it, it's the rain, but this is also the most wet part of the track, mind you. Like, there are some clips of the junior races and X30 Junior in particular that was the session before where the karts basically enter like a dungeon of rain down the back straightaway. Like, it was very wet. And again, mind you,
Standing
Gavin
water,
Bailiff
too.
does not, a lot of standing water. Gavin Bailiff does not have 6,532 laps around Homestead in the last 2 years like Alan Isambard does. Not 1,000 laps around in the rain like he does. It doesn't surprise me that in one of his first chances to lead someone through that corner with no reference point, he's a little bit more conservative. If that's a brake test, that is one of the worst places I've ever seen someone brake test another driver at. And I mean, look, Gavin, he even said in the interview, he knew he didn't have the pace. So doing something along those lines and putting himself at risk of losing a podium just for the purpose of getting one up on Isambard, I can't really see it, honestly. I'm not going to lie to you, Dave, on that one. But
so you're in the camp of 100% Isambard. Isambard's fault then, for sure.
So I want to start with the first incident, right? Because that was the one that I kind of started with on Alex. I think it's, to me, the more debatable incident. And I got the chance when I was clipping replays this week, and I saw both angles of it. I saw the front or the back view that we saw on the broadcast, and the front view that we saw that we put on replay after the race. And the view from turn 5 looks a lot more damning, I would say, on Isambard coming over. It wasn't fully. I mean, Bailiff's hands were not completely clean on that one. He did kind of fade a little bit more to the outside, but Isambard was clearly making a move to kind of lead himself down the track. So I would say it's not a traditional swerving incident. It's not one of those that we're really trying to get out of the racing. It's a racing incident, but if you're Alan Isambard there, you're on the outside, you understand why you're trying to make that move to kind of pinch him low. I think Isambard kind of initiated the contact more. If I was race directing, I would say they both penalized themselves about equally, probably would have let it go, but in a grand scheme of things, slightly more fault, if not predominantly Isambard at fault. However, the second incident, the one that in my opinion was way worse on the track, was the one into the final corner that Dave and I were just talking about. To me, that one is about as indefensible as you get. And I mean, in all honesty, like, Bailiff had been racing him extremely hard for a few laps. I get that it's in the rain, you're driving a shifter, it's really tough to drive those karts at a high level. And both Alan and Gavin are really talented racing drivers. They have had a lot of experience. Like, they're both great. And Alan had a really good weekend when it comes to pace. But as a driver, you cannot put yourself in those situations where you're just simply cleaning someone out in the final corner. And that's whether or not that's what truly happened. No one knows what went through Alan's head there, but there's very little doubt in my mind that that incident was fully on Alan. And if it's for the reason that I would speculate that it is, it's more along the lines of kind of him being flustered, and whether it being an intentional takeout or just a simple, he'd made up his mind where his breaking point was going to be, and if Bailiff was going to break earlier, then that's where it's going to be, then that is up for other people to decide. But regardless, there's no doubt that that's more on Isambard. And to do that after lap after lap after lap of battling, I mean, let's call it a spade there. It's a loss of composure in some way, whether it be through a mistake or simply through cleanly clearing someone out. And if you're Alan Isambard and you're trying to take it to the next level at the Winter Series, you still had a podium on the books. Yes, the time was running out to catch up to Cooper Beckman. But as we saw through the rest of the race, the pace was there to catch him. And as Isenbar mentioned in the interview, the pace was there to catch him. There was nothing to really gain by simply booting out Bailiff out of the way. And yes, there's a chance that you would have hindered him more. But as a racing driver, you have to trust yourself more if you want to make that pass cleanly. Because as it is, we all saw it on camera. It doesn't look good for either of these two guys, the whole spat that they have, but in particular, at least on the on-track side of things, it really doesn't look good for someone who had the pace to win over the course of the weekend to maybe it wasn't intentional. I don't want to put intent in there. That gets into a really slippery slope, but at a minimum, it was an egregious mistake that was really caused by the situation. And it's not something you want to see if you're trying to compete at the top level of pro shifter. And I really hope that Alan kind of doesn't have that happen again over the next couple of rounds. And Alex, I mean, you were there. You were kind of on the front lines this week, and you put yourself out on the racetrack over that last final. What did you see on that side of things?
Yeah, you mentioned it. We'll never know intent, so we can't bring it up or mention it because we will never know, right? First thing I want to mention is it's raining, and there are different lines that you see be taken. I saw throughout every session in the rain, in the last corner, some drivers opt for the curb, some drivers opt for the middle or the outside, your traditional rain line. And so part of that possibly, right, is it's the earlier braking by Gavin, for one of his first times going through there as the leader of the pack. You don't have a reference point, right? It's constantly changing. It has started to drizzle again, so now it's a little bit more wet than the last time. But Gavin liked the curb in last corner, whereas Alan kind of opted for a little bit off the curb. That being said, I mean, Alan owned up to it, right, in the interview. Like there's no debates on whether or not that he meant to at least give Gavin a nudge through that corner. Maybe not that much to spin him, but for sure wanted to move him. He was tired of him, right? And I mean, not to take anything away from what Alan did, because great driver, and I think he's going to win at least one of the next 2 rounds at the Winter Series next month, as long as it doesn't rain, because it looks like in the rain, Danny has the upper hand. I think we see it a lot in like the NFL, right? We call it rage calling, where like the coach will get mad at a call and they'll start calling bad plays and they'll start throwing it up and blitzing more. And it's just the same thing that what we saw probably with Alan there on the track. And I think, like you said, Emory got flustered, lost his composure a little bit, and he mentioned it, right? Because he was so focused on catching up to Cooper that he was not focused on making the right pass on Gavin. And what Gavin mentioned to us is, listen, he was ready to admit defeat on Alan. He was like, Alan was faster than me. I was ready to let him go. But every time Alan passed him, he'd go wide, and it was like, I'm not going to lift, so I'll take the free crossover move. And that's what we saw for about half that race, is Gavin would consistently get the crossover. It wasn't really Alan or Gavin fighting back on Alan, and Alan got frustrated with that. And I think he started rage driving a little bit, right? Where it was more just driving in anger, which sometimes makes people faster, but sometimes you lose composure. And it's not to say that he's not the only driver in the world that's ever done that. We see it all the time in all forms of motorsport. And I hope, like you mentioned, I hope for next time, he looks at this and learns from it, right? To not let that happen, because at the end of the day, everyone's out for the same goal, right? Everyone wants to move up one more spot on the totem pole in terms of where they finish. And so you cannot get mad at a driver for passing you back. If Gavin felt like that's as high as he was going to go, I don't blame him for passing back, right? Because he felt as though once he got past and the pass was complete, he would continue to probably fall back in the order. And so he kept passing back, and ultimately Alan got tired of it. So yeah, again, I think, like you said, Emory, the first one, debatable on who's more at fault, but I think it looks as though Alan. The second one, I mean, he admitted to it, and for one, I want to say that I respect what Alan did in the interview. Right, it takes a lot for somebody to own up to just saying, "Listen, yeah, I got tired of the guy." But yeah, just for the next time, I really hope that I'm sure that he will. He's a smart kid, mature kid, and one hell of a race car driver. So yeah, I think he'll learn from it, and I don't expect that again from him for sure.
Emory, I think the big thing that I noticed going through that race, watching it, I mean, you and I were both in the booth while that race was going on. Uh, I was not surprised when Isambard sent Bailiff. I was disappointed, but I wasn't surprised because it felt like the entire race had been kind of building to some sort of a confrontation between the two of them. Was I surprised that it kind of got to the point that it got to? Yes. But I wasn't surprised that it happened. I was kind of expecting at some point that those two were finally going to end their confrontation, and it was probably going to end with one of them in the barriers, and it just happened to be Bailiff and not Isambard in this case. I mean, was that kind of the impression that you got watching the race?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of funny you say that because for me, really, it was like every lap, every 5 corners or so, it was like I was having to go back and clip another pass, and so I would be clipping a pass, and then I would hear you guys reacting to the next one that already happened, and with those moves, I mean, let's be fair, Gavin, like Alex mentioned, it just about every single one, it was a crossover or it was just simply undercutting Allen when he missed his breaking point. And I think you could kind of see each individual one, Allen got more and more flustered with it. Now, do I buy the whole logic that Gavin wasn't going to race Allen any differently after the day before? Certainly not. I mean, we saw after the race, we saw tempers were flaring between both of them. We saw Gavin and him make contact after the race. We saw some discussion in the scale line. So that's going to weigh on a driver's mind. I mean, they have the memory of an elephant. So it's obvious that there was some play in that Gavin was going to make his life more difficult and maybe put up more of a challenge than he otherwise would have. But if you're Alan Isambard there, I mean, when basically half of the people watching could kind of tell that you were losing your cool a little bit, you're making more. For me, the giveaway is when a driver starts missing braking zones more frequently and kind of overdriving it, it makes it seem like they're more rash with how the race is going. And that was what I started seeing out of Isambard. I wouldn't say so much it was the passing per se, but more so how he was getting past. He was getting past because he was kind of making uncharacteristic mistakes. And I mean, yeah, I think once you got down to it, I would not have predicted necessarily in that exact corner what was going to happen, but it was not a surprise for me that Isambard decided to ship him. And again, personally, I hope that gets sort of learned from Alan Isambard because I kind of hate to see someone ruin someone else's race, and not only someone else's race but also their own race from just really up to that point. The whole entire battle on Sunday was clean battling. Like there wasn't anything that Gavin did that was dirty. There were some aggressive moves, but nothing that like crossed the line. But I mean, it's not a great look when you can tell when someone kind of loses their composure a bit like that. And so, I mean, again, Allen's a really talented driver. He had good pace. He's going to be a factor to win next round. I have full faith in that. I just think that as a driver, there's those little things that you have to kind of correct. And if you're Isambard, it's kind of between the 2 years. Like the guys aren't going to race you completely cleanly. I mean, I've seen it happen on my own. I've been kind of on both sides of it. When I feel like someone is going to mentally cave in, that impacts how you race them. If you think that you're going to mentally cave in, then you have to know that it's possible other people are going to possibly race you that way. And so, again, I think the first day of incidents were kind of racing incidents one way or the other. The second was clean all the way up until that last hit between Isambard where he kind of caved into the mental side of things, got tired of Bailiff, and ultimately kind of ended that fight right then and there, which is his choice. And I'm not going to completely say intent is possibly just tried to nudge him and went a step too far, but it's not ideal to have that kind of racing. So we'll see what Isambard does next race. We'll see if Bailiff is back and hopefully contending up at the front yet again. But another guy that you could say had a bit of a scruffy race on Sunday in the rain in terms of the battling in the rain was Ryan Norberg. And particularly, we saw him racing against Dalton Haynes, but the more pressing battles that he had were with Thomas Neveau, that we happened to get a lot of that on camera and get both drivers' side of it after the race. Let's see what they said.
About that battle with Ryan, because Ryan mentioned to us that you and him got into it a little bit in qualifying, and it carried over into the final. Is that what it looked like from your point of view?
Yeah. So for me, it's just hard racing. I'm not gonna let anyone step on my toes. I'm there to battle back. So at the end of the day, it's just hard racing, and that's what I like.
And then I mean we're doing good in the final. I mean, it's frustrating. I had a couple incidents with some drivers, which, I mean, it is what it is. It's racing. I mean, you do this as a job, and that's some days you have bad days at the office, and that's basically all this is. And so, I mean, it's good to come out of the weekend with a win and still a top 5. I mean, I don't think really realistically it would have changed the results much. We were the 4th fastest and probably would have finished 4th anyways. So, I mean, it's not like I'm so torn about it. Even with my pushback penalty, I still was ahead of everybody, behind me. So, I mean, it is what it is. Just looking forward to the next couple of rounds. Try and get the championship, and just keeping this momentum going forward.
So there you heard it from Ryan Norberg. I will say his initial post-race interview was a little more, I'd say, heated than that, although still well composed. And Alex, I'll start with you. You were on the side for this. You saw kind of how Norberg reacted and sort of his thoughts on it. You saw Navu's thoughts on it right after the race. What were your thoughts on it when you saw those two going back and forth for lap after lap?
I thought it was awesome. I mean, it's hard racing. It's rain racing, so you're naturally, you don't always have to have contact, right? But rubbing's racing, and I think obviously Navu started it, right? I think the first few passes they were going back and forth on it, rubbing bumpers a little bit, but then the one in turn 5 after Ryan had just clipped his front nose in turn 4, Navu came back from 3 zip codes away and really had no intention of making the corner and kind of landed a side pod to side pod contact with Ryan. And that's the one that kind of set Ryan off a little bit. And then he had one where he went again from a mile back and his rear bumper landed on Ryan's front bumper and dropped the nose. And then from there, Ryan's looking at it as, well, for one, it's a little bit of a disadvantage handling wise. So he's a little bit upset. And as well, at the time, he didn't know that it wasn't going to ultimately affect the result. So he was now upset. We've seen drivers in the past drop the bumper, their races sometimes done. And so then Ryan went through last corner, right? Kind of didn't really turn for turn 12 for a while. But at the end of the day, I think it was, from our perspective, awesome to watch. I think they were both, at fault. And if we heard Ryan, Thomas never really alluded to it, but we heard Ryan mention, that Thomas told him, listen, like this is carrying over from qualifying when they squabbled because Ryan had passed Thomas in qualifying, and that happened to be Ryan's fastest lap, and Ryan's thinking was, listen, like there's no rule that says we can't pass in qualifying, which is totally fair. And so if what Ryan is saying is true and Thomas was upset with Ryan because of that, it ultimately didn't really decide anything because they're both battling for a possible podium spot anyways. So for me, I mean, that's hard racing, but because it's rain racing as well. So it's all fair. I think they both kind of hurt themselves in that one.
Yeah, David, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the big difference between this incident and the Isambard bailiff incident is that this incident walked right up to the line of acceptability, I would say. I mean, they were two very, very similar incidents as far as I'm concerned, because you noticed once they started getting chippy with each other, you're thinking this is escalating, where is it going to end up? But unlike what we saw in Shifter, this never ended up with a driver in the barrier. And, what was there ever going to be a point where, one of those two drivers decided to do it? If Naveau had missed the corner by a little bit more, would he have shipped Ryan into turn 5? I don't know. We'll never know the answer to that question. But, as things are, and as they are on the tape, and as they turned out, they walked right up to the line of the difference between rubbing is racing and wrecking is not racing. And they managed to rub and not wreck. So, yeah, I typically agree with Alex that, while it was definitely chippy, it wasn't, it didn't cross a line.
Yeah, I'm fully in agreement with you guys on that one. I mean, at the end of the day, between the two guys, there's respect there. There's also a little bit of, hey, you race me one way, I'm going to race you the same way. And as I think Alex made a point of this a little bit at the end, where he mentioned, like, in the rain, your standards for what's acceptable, I think, get a little bit more wide when it comes to passing and overtaking and subsequently defending as well. And like Nouveau's incident in turn 5, where he kind of chucked it in from 3 kart lengths back. Under normal circumstances, that kind of pass kind of frowned upon. When you come back into it, you're a long ways back. You're not going to make the corner. You chuck it into the other guy's side pod. In the rain, though, and given the context that Norberg made a similarly aggressive move to a slightly lesser degree in the previous corner, I think that adds more context to it. It makes it more acceptable. And when you're rain racing, and those are the sorts of opportunities you're going to get when it's tougher to pass, it makes sense why he did it. And I personally felt like there was nothing that I saw in that clip that was too far. Certainly the kind of thought process afterwards, and Norberg was right to be upset. I mean, when someone races you that aggressively in the moment, you're going to be upset. And the same thing goes for Nouveau. When you have Norberg chuck it in for 2 kart lengths back, and then subsequently in the final corner on that same lap, kind of not turning until he gets almost to the apex, that's another thing that in the heat of the moment as a driver, you're going to be a little bit upset about. But I feel like they just barely kind of stayed on the right side of the line there. There wasn't anything too crazy. And again, when you get into these rain races, you're naturally going to have a more physical race. I mean, I've been, again, something that I've kind of been on both sides of. When you're in these sorts of battles in the rain, like I've had one race win that I think kind of sticks out to me that I got taken away from me because someone launched it into the hairpin at Trackhouse from a solid 2.5, 3 kart lengths back. And that one, in the moment, again, I was really hurt by that because I was like, it was 3 kart lengths back. And I reflected on it, and I was like, it's hard to pass off the line in rain racing. You're going to slide up. You're naturally going to make contact. And yes, it was an aggressive move. Would I have done the exact same thing? Probably. And as much as Ryan might have been upset after the race to get the bumper penalty, and certainly kind of the way that Nouveau raced him, at the end of the day, we saw Norberg race him in a very similar way once he kind of got wind of what Nouveau was trying to do. And it's all you're looking for in a race. It's a physical race. Some drivers are going to accept that physicality and race more physical than others. And as long as there's no one racing significantly over the line, I think that it's all fair and well. So for me, there wasn't any issue on these instances. I think it was 2 drivers battling it out. At some points, maybe going right up to the line, but nothing too crazy on this one. But one incident that I want to cover, one that really was not covered at all on the broadcast, and you might not have seen all weekend unless you were in the paddock and really in tune with what happened, was one involving Diego Ramos, and one that he ultimately got disqualified for on the Saturday main event for dangerous driving standards. And I want to take a look at this. We have the incident pulled up and to show you guys, and I want to get your take on this. This involved Ramos as well as Brandon Cart and Dalton Haynes. So we'll get a look at this incident right now.
We just watched some of the video there. You and Ramos got into it. Unfortunately, Carr collected as well. I want your side of the story between you and Ramos.
Yeah, so pretty much it was actually Brandon versus Ramos there. Going into the double rights, Brandon was setting Ramos up. He goes to the inside on the quick left. Ramos chops him up. Brandon goes over the curb. They're side by side, and they make contact, and they go really slow. So they slow down because they're touching. So I come back and go to the left, go to the far inside. Now we're 3 wide. Brandon has now turned off of Ramos, gotten off of his bumper. Now we're directly 3 wide. Ramos, Brandon, me. And Ramos looks at Brandon. You can see it clear as day in the video. Turns to the right, collects Brandon and then collects me. And I go up in the air and spin around. And it ruined my race. And, I mean, there's nothing I could really do about it. And
I mean, you and Dalton got into it a little bit. You want to talk about it from your perspective?
I don't know. He come to me saying I sent him to outside the track, but I didn't see him. I don't know. yeah, it's just not kind of racing really. It's like when you drive people hard, you send it in deep and make sure it sticks, but swerving people down the straight, like, come on. He did it once, well, he's done it multiple times, which, yeah, okay. You save him, I helped him out a bit, race last year, GoPro, and then he does the same thing again, like, what, like, it's supposed to be the pro class and we're swerving people down the straight. If you sent it in hard on me and passed hard, which it's racing, which I would have respected and said, yeah, fair play. But just swerving people down the straight after you've done it multiple times, and we've spoke to each other about it multiple times, and just keeps wanting to do it. So, yeah, it's just not professional at all. So.
Yeah, so obviously something there that we saw from Diego. Look, the SKUSA officials agreed not a good look. They DQ'd him for aggressive driving, going beyond the line there. And I have to say, given what we've seen in recent years of trying to get the swerve out of the sport, it makes sense. Having said that, I'm not going to go and say this was egregiously intentional by Diego. I think that, again, as same thing that we saw from Carr or from Isambard and Gavin, we're going to apply the same sort of intent. Doesn't necessarily, can't always be fully judged. Not a good look. At worst or at best, you're saying Diego really had a lapse in judgment there and should not have been doing that. But at the same time, he's not the only driver in that field that did it. He's not the first to have done it. He's not the last. Doesn't make it any less acceptable. But yeah, that's something we've seen it a few times in the last couple of years, Alex. That's something you never like to see. And in my opinion, not an incident that is to be taken lightly. And I think what the correct decision was to disqualify him. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we all saw the video, so it's obviously a touchy subject, but it has to be said. It has to be had, right? Because every series has made a point that they want to eliminate swerving from racing, and they have made big strides at it, right? Because it's impossible to fully police, because at the end of the day, a driver's going to do what a driver wants to do. But the penalties now have been raised so high that usually you do it once, and it's probably the last time you're going to do it. We heard a point from Brandon Carr that he made where he, the same thing happened with him and Brandon Carr over at Trackhouse. And so it's not a first time, right? And so at the end of the day, we can't talk about intent because we'll never know. I did talk to Diego off camera, and he told me, listen, like it was a lapse in judgment, right? It was more of a loss of composure because he was frustrated with Carr and how he was racing him throughout the race, and especially the corner prior kind of got into Diego, and Diego returned the favor a little bit, and unfortunately it collected Dalton, right? So to Ramos's point in the interview of he didn't see Dalton, he probably didn't see Dalton, right? Because he was the inside of a 3-wide sandwich. And maybe you could argue put himself in a bad. I wouldn't say so, because it's two drivers going slowly up the corner. You're going to take your 2-for-1 any chance you can. It's unfortunate for Dalton that he got collected. It really should have been Brandon that was probably spun around in the air. But just the way that the tires, collided, it didn't shape out to be that way. Ultimately, yeah, I think from what we can see in the video, it looks like Ramos completely at fault. And I hope for sure, especially with the DQ, right? Because that for sure eliminates him from the championship contention in the winter series. But it also it's not a good look, because now you're on notice with the series, and you don't ever want to put yourself in a bad light. And so, Diego's a good kid, good driver, and for sure I hope he looks at this, learns from it. Because you also don't want to create bad blood between drivers as well and teams. So, yeah, for sure, Diego, definitely. I hope he looks at that and cleans it up.
I mean, here's the lesson to be learned from this. I mean, if we could get the replay back up, I mean, this is pretty cut and dry in my opinion. Auto racing is not a boxing match. There are not just two competitors out there, right? I mean, you can take a swipe at somebody, but at the end of the day, You mentioned it, Alex. Dalton Haynes was doing absolutely nothing wrong. Doing a move, while yeah, it's a little bit risky to go 3 wide. I mean, that's auto racing. The difference here, of course, is that Ramos turns in 100 feet before the corner, and then that's obvious from the video. And and that this incident is a great example of why Bailiff was so mad at Isenbar. It's not necessarily that two competitors are settling it with one another. And again, Brandon and Diego are both very nice kids. But at the end of the day, your actions don't just have consequences for both of the drivers who are beefing. If you cause a crash and collect, someone else, you can get someone completely innocent hurt. And that's the factual reality of the situation. And I commend SKUSA for taking action against Diego for that incident. Completely justified penalty as far as I'm concerned. And I echo your guys' statement because I think Diego, I don't think he's a bad person whatsoever. I don't think he's trying to do anything that's going to get anybody hurt because, frankly, I don't think any race car driver wants to see themselves or anyone else get hurt because of an incident. I think, a good weekend is one where you never see the ambulance come out, right? And so for me, I would like to see racing continue to take steps in those directions. And the less incidents that you have in a weekend, the less chance you have of seeing a driver leave the track in an ambulance. And so, the less of this stuff we see, the better, in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, I really do think this is not an indictment on Diego personally. I think he's a good guy, like you guys had mentioned. I think certainly this is not a good look in the slightest on him. I will say no one's hands are completely clean in the sport. At the end of the day, to some varying degree, there's always going to be some levels of infringements. Like if you're going to race at the highest level, if you're going to race at the front of a Pro X30 field, there's going to be sometimes where you maybe come close to crossing the line. Was that way beyond the line? Yes, it was unacceptable. However, Brandon Carr got a penalty for swerving last year in Orlando, and Brandon Carr has been pretty clean since then. He's a good driver, has been mostly a clean driver, but he's not immune to that kind of incident as well. Dalton Haynes, again, he was the innocent bystander, did nothing wrong in that situation, was frankly unlucky to be in that situation. Yes, it's an aggressive move, and yes, I don't doubt that Diego didn't expect to be 3 wide there because that's the place that you're almost never going to be 3 wide in a race at Homestead coming into turn number 2. But that doesn't change the fact that Dalton did nothing wrong in that situation. But again, these guys, everyone that we've seen has had some level of incident at some point in a kart race. And Diego had a really severe incident there. And we've seen that severe incident in the past. We've seen Aiden Rudolph have an incident in a 2022 Winter Series race against Finnegan Bailiff and Carson Morgan. It wasn't Cole, it was Carson Morgan that was in that incident. And again, 3 wide situation. Rudolph's side of it was, hey, I didn't see that we were 3 wide into the last corner. I didn't see that Morgan was there and Bailiff was there. And I think that you really it's something that Rudolph will have learned from. There were people calling for his head after that race. And again, I was kind of on the side of, hey, it's unacceptable maneuver. He was right to get penalized for it. Doesn't mean that he's a dirty driver. It means, hey, the move was unacceptable. And you live and learn. It doesn't make the kid, doesn't make the driver a horrible person. And I think the more that we can kind of fit that middle line of, hey, let's call it out for what it is. Like, these guys are running the pro category. There shouldn't be any lenience on those sorts of moves. Like, that could have been really dangerous and ended really badly for Dalton. And we were lucky that it ended up with only Dalton really doing a pirouette. Somehow the cart was fine, which is a testament to Sodi, I guess you could say, for building a cart made out of titanium, apparently. But I mean, that incident ended up relatively inconsequential. In the other incident that I was talking about with Finn and with Carson Morgan and Aiden Rudolph, yes, the aftermath of it, people calling for Rudolph's head, that was difficult. But you look back 2 years later, and what difference does it really make in terms of the long-term outcome? Like, I'm sure Rudolph learned from that incident. He's toned it down a bit, and he's a good kid. Again, like, all of these guys are good racing drivers that at times test the limits, go beyond the limits, and it's fair to call the mount for it, it's fair to say, hey, like this was too far. This was something that is not good racing. And I think Brandon and Dalton both did a good job of kind of doing that in their interviews. They didn't say, hey, Diego's an awful person. I mean, Brandon said, hey, like he's done it before. That's not cool. That's his opinion. That's fair. And we should certainly be talking about, hey, like, let's not do this. But you have to trust these drivers to be able to learn from it. And if it's a repeated incident, there's safety measures in place, there's rules in place to make sure that if a driver does too many of these things, they aren't coming back. We've seen suspensions by the series, we've seen them work together to make sure that this kind of racing isn't tolerated. And you do that. I think Diego Ramos from this race getting DQ'd is a harsh penalty, the harshest we've seen in recent memory since, I believe, the Nate Cicero incident really in 2022, where we've had that kind of severe punishment for one incident in the pro category levied out by SKUSA. But it's something that I think fits the crime. It's not an indictment in the long-term season for Diego. He can still come back. He can win races, compete for a title in the regular season, and kind of build off of this. But it's an incident that had no place this weekend, and I think that it was something that we had to call out here because this is something that we've seen in karting. We've seen people get hurt from it, and I really do hope that Diego and anyone that saw that, anyone that's been involved in that, kind of learns from it. And I'm not going to say that there's never going to be another situation where that they're going to cross the line, because that's never the case. As a racing driver, you're trying to find every little advantage. And hey, I mean, swerving, it's against the rules, but there's times where you're tempted to do it. And so it's not the last time that we're going to see swerving, but I hope it's something that everyone can learn from. And I hope that Diego doesn't do that again, because it really wasn't a good look. And I mean, it could have gotten someone hurt. So that's my take on it. Nothing against Diego as a person. I think he's a great driver, a great person, someone that I really have a lot of respect for. And I don't think that respect is going away, but he needs to learn from that one. And I'm glad that SKUSA gave the penalty that I did. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I'm just gonna kind of echo a little bit from what you said. I hope it's the last time we see swerving, but I agree, I don't think it is. But that's why the penalties keep getting harsher and harsher, and it takes. We've seen it before with drivers in the past, but it takes somebody getting the harsher end of it, right? It takes a penalty, a bad penalty on a driver for people to look at that and say, wow, maybe I shouldn't do that. And I think it takes what we saw with the Isambard bailiff thing. It wasn't swerving, but the result that occurred with the tires touching is the same result that we could see with swerving. And so I think you look at it, if you take Dalton out of the equation, and Brandon Carr was lucky not to end up, in the air doing a 360. And when done wrong, which I've seen it a lot in karting, swerving could end up bad for both parties. So I've never actually understood the ideology of a driver wanting to swerve somebody, because it usually ends up bad for both of you anyways, because if you touch tire to tire, you're probably facing the wrong way before the next corner. When done, we've seen it, guys side pod to side pod, okay, fine. But at the end of the day, I really don't see the point in it, and I hope we truly start to get away from that, because to me, when that's not in the mix, the racing is very good. But I think that's why we're seeing series up the ante on the penalties and how harsh they are, and yeah, I think for sure. I hope it's one of, if not the last time we see a swerve on the kart track.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always looked at it like the swerve isn't something that you're gonna do like with the intent of making contact on the swerve. 99% of the people I've talked about that openly admit to swerving and openly talk about swerving say it's almost an intimidation factor. So, I mean, when you do that kind of maneuver, you're not anticipating the contact. You're anticipating the other guy's going to chicken out of it, which a lot of times in the lower categories happens. I mean, I was having this discussion with someone a couple of nights ago that it really took a number of times of me kind of getting the short end of the stick when it came from aggressive driving to really figure out, hey, like I need to just hold my line, stand up for it, and if we both crash, we both crash. It hurts both of us. And that's kind of and that's kind of the attitude that I think a lot of guys get by with in mini or junior, where it's kind of like, hey, like I can swerve, I can go back and forth, and the other guy is going to back out of it because they don't want to crash. And then even when they do crash, there's usually not quite as many eyeballs on them. They don't get near as much, they don't need as much scrutiny under their own tent. And so it takes you getting up to the pro category and kind of having this sort of situation where all of these guys are the best of the best, the aggressive drivers. Like, again, like I mentioned, in some ways, Brandon Carr being on the receiving end of this one is kind of, I don't want to say fitting in a sense, but it's like he's someone that has kind of been through the punishment route, been through the, hey, I did this in Orlando. It cost me a pole position heading into Sunday in USPKS. And I don't think he ever flirted with that line again the rest of the year. So, like those sorts of things, when you're in that situation, he knows the negative effects of swerving. He also knows not to back out of it. And unfortunately, the consequence of that is they make contact and someone wrecks. But when you get into the pro levels, these guys aren't just going to back out and let you do it. You're going to face consequences. We saw it with Carr and with Ramos, and unfortunately, Dalton really had nothing he could have done there. He wasn't even in position to back out of it. He was just an innocent bystander. But like these guys, I'm sure if Dalton was in Carr's situation, he would have done the same thing. So like these guys not backing out of the swerve moves makes it inherently more dangerous, but also makes it to where that swerving is, like you mentioned, pretty much pointless. Like very rarely when someone doesn't back out are you both going to come away scotch-free from it. So I think you make a good point there, and I think that I'm again hopeful that swerving gets out of karting sooner rather than later. I know that Blake Hunt at USPKS has done a really good job of penalizing to make sure that swerving is discouraged. We've seen SKUSA do very similar stuff on their race directing over the last few years, and along those lines, every other championship that I've been a part of, I've seen efforts to be done that have kind of limited the impact of swerving and try to get it out of racing. So hopefully that makes an impact. And David, I'm going to send it over to you here because I mean, you kind of have a unique situation here where you haven't been around karting nearly as much to see a lot of the I don't know why I said swerving epidemic over the last few years, but you're now seeing kind of the aftermath of it where you're seeing all the penalties and now the severe reaction to it. But you have seen, I mean, as a big IndyCar guy, you know how like this kind of thing, when you're playing basically battle royale open wheel car racing at 200 miles an hour, swerving's not heavily tolerated at all. It's something that is one of the worst things you can do in an open wheel car. So do you have any extra input you like to add on to this from your perspective, kind of seeing it play out in karting like it did this weekend?
Well, yeah, and let's make no doubt about it. These are open wheel vehicles, right? I mean, the consequences, while it's a slower speed accident, can be very catastrophic, no matter what category you're racing in, whether you're in an X30, whether you're in an Indy Pro car, whether you're in an Indy car, Formula One. We've seen it in the past in every level of the sport. When someone swerves, chances are the consequences are real bad. And so, yeah, we've seen efforts that sanctioning bodies across the world have made to limit the amount of blocking and swerving, and when can you make a move? How many moves can you make? Can you make a move and then come back across the track or not? There's all sorts of different theories about what's acceptable and what is unacceptable. But I think that I think it when you see it, right? You know it when it's out of bounds, when it's too much, when a line has been crossed. And in this particular case, really obvious that a line got crossed, right? I mean, there's no real gray area when you're in a short chute between the first and second corners at Miami, and you're turning into the corner that early, or turning into another driver that early. I mean, there was really no, kind of like Alex said, there was really nothing good. There was no positive result that was going to come out of that. And frankly, like I said earlier, the result that we got was very lucky, because Dalton could have been seriously hurt. And let's say instead the cart that gets launched in that 3 wide confrontation is Brandon Carr. He's right in the middle of a group of 4 go-karts. If that thing goes upside down, there's a very good chance he gets thrown out of the cart and gets hurt, because someone else would have hit him. Because there's only so much reaction time you can have when someone gets turned upside down in the middle of a group like that. So, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why blocking is frowned upon at pretty much every level of the sport, outside of Formula One, ironically enough. But you know, there, I think it's a good thing that sanctioning bodies see that, recognize it, and especially, I guess it's a newer thing in karting, as you guys say, but hey, you know what? I think it's the right call. It's just a safety thing, and frankly, it's a more legitimate competition. I mean, yes, you want to see guys be able to defend their position. I don't think you want to go to the rule that the Indy Racing League had for a little while, which actually cost Elio Castroneves a win at Edmonton, where you can't make a move at all. But I think, there's definitely a difference between making a defensive move, anticipating the move that your opponent is going to make, and turning into a guy on a straightaway.
Yeah, it definitely is something that, I mean, look, it's not in karting in any level of motorsports is dangerous. In IndyCar in particular, we've seen instances with swerving, we've seen penalties with swerving. In F1, we've seen instances with swerving, and yet somehow we end up in the same boat where they don't penalize it as much as they should have. But hopefully, with this weekend and with other weekends, we can continue to work to try to get this out of karting. And I mean, again, the Diego incident didn't catch it on the main broadcast, but that doesn't mean it wasn't any less impactful. I mean, these are guys that are still high quality drivers racing for the front field positions in the pro categories. So again, this was a great weekend of racing in Homestead. I know we spent the last 45 minutes or so talking about some of the negative parts of the weekend, but again, some great racing, clean racing, only one red flag this weekend or two red flags, but considering the conditions that we were in on Sunday with the heavy rain, the downpours, and really, really, really tough conditions for drivers to manage, I feel like it was a clean racing weekend, all things considered, and a lot of positives to be taken from this weekend. Again, the largest field in SKUSA Winter Series history, lots to build off of heading into rounds 3 and 4. Some big stories between Alessandro De Tullio winning a lot, between Diego Diaz winning both races on Sunday in the junior categories. Some big performances all the way throughout, and ultimately a double win for Danny Formal to continue his momentum from Supernats. So this was a very good weekend. We're excited to build off of it. And hey, my man Caleb Viesca, his SKUSA debut in the Winter Series went really well on the mic. Shout out to him for that. But I have to say, he's talking to me about calling me out for the Chiefs beanie. And, we watched the Chiefs and Miami Dolphins game the entire time on Saturday. And I explicitly mentioned I'm not a massive Chiefs fan, but I've been a Patrick Mahomes supporter since he was at college in Texas Tech. If you don't believe me, search me up on YouTube. You'll find one of the most popular Patrick Mahomes highlight videos on the internet. And so I am a Patrick Mahomes fan from the get-go. And so I'm naturally going to support the Chiefs when it comes to the playoffs and when my hometown Carolina Panthers are as bad under the leadership of David Tepper as they are. So I don't need any questioning on that. I do, however, have to question Caleb Viesca because not only was it his very first weekend on the mic on the SKUSA Winter Series, but it was also the very first time I've ever heard of him being a Houston Texans fan. Not a word from him all season long and all season last year when they weren't that good. They were the number 2 pick in the draft. But lo and behold, they beat Kyle Cuthbertson, our producer for this show's Cleveland Browns, and suddenly he's the biggest Texans fan on the internet and championing his Texans support. So that's all I gotta say, Caleb. When did you become a Texans fan? I want to hear that explanation. But hey, that's what our future broadcasts and our future shows will be to show. So from myself, from David Land, from Alexander Searle,
I'm here. I'm here.
Kermit the Frog, a.k.a. David Land, a.k.a. Patrick Mahomes, Alexander Searle as well, another New York Yankees / Miami Dolphins fans, and from everyone else at the Kart Chaser crew, this has been episode number 2 of Grid Talk, powered by Acceleration Kart Racing, showcasing all of some of the best equipment on the internet for kart racing. Go check them out. Thank you for them for powering this show, and we will see you next time.